Okay, welcome back to Hollywood Balls with me, Geordie Pete Redding, and always excited when my next guest is joining us, a regular to Hollywood Balls, and it couldn't be better timing. Always a voice of reason with the whistle, a former GM of the PGMOL, and I wish he still was. Welcome back, Keith Hackett.
Hi, Peter. Delighted to be back.
Great stuff. Now, before we delve into everything, it's been a while, and when I say delve in, I mean controversy at its highest. But what have you been up to recently?
Well, I write regular columns for the Daily Telegraph,
Yep.
and I sort of am president of a local football club.
I was going to ask how that was going. How they doing?
It's going great. I mean, we would not exist without volunteers.
Sure.
And when I looked at what they've achieved in the close season, we played our first competitive game last Saturday.
Yep.
The first time we played a competitive game for 6 months.
Wow.
That's the length of how much we've been locked down. Of course, the club relies very much on revenue, and we operate 22 teams. So just the simple thing of buying footballs, kits, so the 6-7-year-olds can play is a massive challenge for everybody. And then meeting the standards and requirements of the competition in terms of standard of the ground. I must say the ground's looking terrific. We spent a fair amount of money on the junior pitches over the fence of the main team pitch, and those are looking absolutely pristine. And everybody's remarked how well the club is looking.
That's fantastic.
So that side's moving pretty well as a club.
And nice to have everyone back on the pitch.
Well, yeah, and it also keeps my connection with the game that I love. Yes, I watch Premier League games, mainly on television, like we're all doing, but just standing at the side of a pitch with a couple of 300 people, it's just like a good occasion, in the fresh air and all that goes with it. Great
stuff. From good to bad, let's get straight into it from the beginning. What can you tell us about the new handball rule? Ultimately, who came up with this rule? Because it's really intriguing.
I think we have to go back slightly and understand that the laws of the game are the responsibility of the International Football Association Board, better known as the IFAB.
Okay.
And the IFAB is made up of a panel whereby England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales vote, along with FIFA.
Okay.
And so each of the home nations have one vote, and FIFA has 4. So if we take world football, and even if we go Germany, Italy, Spain in Europe, those countries are really represented through FIFA rather than having to say themselves. And what they did a few years ago was they decided that they would review all the laws and try and make them easier for referees, which is always a danger because at the head of it, they put a former referee, who I know quite well, David Ellery.
Yes.
He spent his life, in fairness to him, at Harrow School as an housemaster. And he reached a good standard of international refereeing. So let me make that. But sometimes I worry about either him or his colleagues or the IFAB, because they only generally meet to make formal changes to the laws of the game over one weekend on an annual basis.
Right.
And the business meeting, if you like, which might involve a few players and all that goes, discusses the laws and all that goes with it. Then what the confusion is, they sit round a table and they thrash out the changes and adaptations. But what we're getting now is we've got Kalina, a referee who I consider to be the best referee ever. He's now head of refereeing at FIFA, putting his spin onto things. And another Italian, Roberto Rossetti, who's head of UEFA, joining forces to put their spin on things and confuse everybody in the game and come up with interpretations that seem to discount players, tactics, and what might happen in a game. And I think making the life of a referee not easier, but much more difficult. When I see this week a former colleague and you know, one of England's most outstanding referees, George Courtney, colleague, he doesn't come out in the press, but this week he came out in the press and he said that if we are going to accept that the Dyer incident in the Newcastle v Tottenham game is an offence, then the game's gone mad. Those were his sort of words. So I just want to get a clear understanding about, you know, because everybody's saying, well, somebody's changed the laws. The laws around what we're seeing have not changed. Let me tell you what the law change this year on handball is. And it says, accidental handball by an attacking player should only be penalised if it immediately results in a goal or an obvious opportunity for a player or their team to score a goal. And I thought that was, I don't like the accidental handball rule. I think it's a nonsense. But rather than having that guy down the wing and the bobble ups and it hits his arm and then it goes to another player and then we have a goal and we go, no, near the halfway line, it accidentally hit the forward's hand. We're going to rule the goal out. They've compressed it and they've said, right, okay, it's from the point at which the accidental handball takes place by the attacker and it goes into goal, or the accidental handball goes directly to a forward and he has a goal scoring opportunity. That's the only change.
Okay.
From last year. So do you see where the confusion is? Because what we've got is what I anticipated might happen. And that is, nobody really delves into the laws of the game other than the referees.
Sure.
In fairness. And so what the man on the side of the pitch at grassroots level understands is if the ball accidentally hits a defender, then it's penalised. He's committed an offence, we're going to have a penalty kick. And that's not the law. You know, that is not the law. And what the interpretation has done is it's effectively put a spin on things that is resulting, quite rightly, in people like Steve Bruce and Roy Hodgson coming out and saying, what is going off?
Yeah, exactly.
You've got the manager of Newcastle United and someone who I admire. He talks in a straight fashion off the pitch and on the pitch. You know, I've refereed him. He might tell you what he thinks, but he'll accept an opinion. So you can have a conversation even though you're refereeing the match. So he comes out and says, no way. And if we look at the Dyer incident, this is a player who has jumped up to head the ball and he's using his arms in an elevated manner. Now, the law last year said that where the silhouette of a player becomes larger and the ball strikes, then that could be or is an offence. But what he failed to understand is this. The first line of the law that's written, and it says, it is an offence if a player deliberately touches the ball with their hand and arm, including moving their hand and arm towards the ball.
Right.
Now, in the Dyer case, the ball struck his hand and arm. Okay, I have no worries with that, but he's got his back to the ball.
Yep.
Distance plays a part in terms of can he withdraw his arm? Can he move it? But he's not even seeing the ball. So as a consequence, it strikes him. And then we have the VAR review, comes back, and the referee's operating under instructions.
Yeah.
So let me make it clear. The referee's the fall guy here. Because his boss has said, you will apply the law, which is being dictated by FIFA in relation to handball.
So can I just ask a question, Keith? Can I ask you a quick question? Am I right in thinking then that even the referees are finding this incredible and disagree with it?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've, you know, I had a young referee at grassroots level text me this morning, and it was quite interesting because he's saying, this is making my life difficult. It's hard enough refereeing a football match.
Sure.
Applying law changes when they do occur that don't take into account grassroots football. You know, because we have to understand that the game and the laws of the game are applicable to the child on the park at 6, 7 years old kicking a ball to some degree, grassroots football and professional football. And often the referees in the local park, well, more often than not, they haven't got assistant referees helping them. They're on their own.
No.
And therefore, they're being forgotten. And that's why I shout up, criticise, and say, think again. Because David Ellery was charged with simplifying the laws of the game to make them better understanding. And some aspects of that he's achieved. That when they come along and start to say, we're going to treat a player, a forward, different to a defender, and we're taking away a judgment call by the referee, then we've not made it easier, we've made it more difficult. And when you've got in the English Premier League seasoned managers who've been in the game as long as I have, and journalists who equally have been in the game as long as I have. And I've seen some wonderful articles written about this particular subject. And I, you know, so it's important that nobody hides behind the fact that this is a law change. It is not. I've quoted very clearly that the law change was with accidental handball. What is happening this year is a different interpretation on the laws, which I believe have reduced the opportunity of a referee to apply his judgment, his skill sets, to say, I've seen that deliberate movement. I believe that that player who is making himself bigger and larger, which happened in my time. You know, I've stood up and given presentations and said, where a defender makes his body larger by preventing the ball passing, i.e. stopping a promising attack, stopping a definite goal, penalise. We all bought into that and we've operated that. So this is the area where somebody's got a beef as a former referee, right? Not me. I got a beef as well, but he's got a beef. But he's got the power to say this is how we're going to implement it.
Yeah.
And I think the weakness of the PGMOL is that, you know, in that seat when you're in charge, you've really got to be strong. You've got to put up with the calls from Sir Alex Ferguson and Sam Allardyce, and the bosses as well, because you are in a fairly difficult position. Because look, referees, if you were going in a shop and referees were on a shelf, you wouldn't buy a referee forever. You wouldn't buy. You know, a referee's a resistant purchase. Can we have the game without them?
Bit like going to dentists.
Yeah, exactly that. And therefore, what we have to do as referees is communicate before the season starts. If we're going to have an interpretation, and let me tell you, the reason I'm supportive of the referees and why somebody needs to come out and support them is this. Many years ago, I attended a meeting on a Thursday in Coventry. On the following Sunday, I was due to referee the FA Cup semi-final at Villa Park. And at that meeting, they stood up and said, we're changing the interpretation of the denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity. We've all believed, all of you have been told, that it has to be a cynical challenge. The Willie Young, if you like, in the cup final, player going on to goal, whacked down, that's it, all he gets is a free kick. So denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity, the actual, if you like, interpretation was changed on that Thursday. On the Sunday, I went out as a referee with a different interpretation. The journalists were not aware, the players were not aware, the manager was not aware, and during that game, Gary Crosby was brought down by a West Ham player, Tony Gale. And I've blown out and I've gone, oh my God. And I've now got to send Tony Gale off, which I did. Ruined the game. Unfair to the player. Massively unfair to the teams. Media saying, Bobby Charlton's what's he doing? All making those comments. Because I'd been instructed that in interpretation on DOGSO that had come down from the IFAB and FIFA had to be implemented.
Wow.
If that had happened 1 week before, I'd have given a free kick and nothing else.
Sure.
So you see how these people who mess around with the implementation, I say to them quite clearly, when you sit down at that IFAB meeting and you amend the law, introduce a change to law, whatever you want to call it, you've got to make certain that you're very clear with the interpretation. And that interpretation has to follow the laws of the game.
Sure. So
I think what we've got is an overreaction by the PGMOL to act, not to filter. And to actually go back and say, we're not interpreting it that way. Now, I can also give you an instance where there was a change to the offside law, and suddenly the alert Sam Allardyce, who was in charge of Bolton at the time, decided that within the law, as it was penned, he could put 2 forwards on each goalpost at a free kick. Free kick. And of course he did it. And an alert referee, Uriah Rennie, decided, no, this is not right, and blew. And found something to blow. So he stopped it. And I can tell you, on the Monday, I was at the Premier League office. We took a taxi to the FA, and we had a round table meeting and said to the IFAB, we're not interpreting that law that way. And now what we've had is, after last week's debacle, we've had the PGMOL and the Premier League come out and say, actually, we've instructed referees to soften this approach. Now, I think, having started refereeing in 1960 and been very involved in the game since, I don't know what that means.
No.
Soften? What does that mean? Does that mean that we are going to say to our referees, we are not going to penalise accidental handball in circumstances that they can play numerous clips to say, on this one we're going to do, on this one we're not. And in the case of the Dyer incident, in the way that which they're still claiming is a correct decision, based on the body shape being made larger than the silhouette, right? Now I contend this. If that player had been facing the player who headed the ball and it struck his arm in that fashion, I would expect a penalty kick to be awarded, because he's got the opportunity to withdraw his hand. I've then got to take into account, as a referee, I've got to make a judgment. Is his hand in that position to gain elevation, or is it to stop the ball passing or to gain possession? And that's the judgment call.
But it seems there, Keith, though, by saying soften it, that again just doesn't clarify anything. And now it's again down to each individual referee's clarification. And some may see it as a harsher decision than another. So again, there's no across the book. If it's
Correct.
here to your hand, that's handball. By saying soften the approach, one referee may soften it, the other may deem it to be still. So there's no movement forward, is there?
No, it's a fudge, and I've seen these fudges before. The PGMOL and the Premier League come under pressure. So what they then have to do tactically is how do we stop this pressure? How do we reduce these negative comments? And they'll come up with a scheme.
Right.
And then we wait. And in reality, it should be much better than that. When I was in charge, I would have the managers in pre-season, and I would say, look, this is how we're going to interpret the laws for the season. At that point, I would know, with reasonable cognitive skills, either going to buy in or they're not. I knew where my pressure points were. I could then go back to the referees and say, look, this is how we're going to shape it a little bit, cool it down a little bit, and then go back to the managers and say, look, this is where we're coming to. I mean, let me give you an example. I sat in front of all the managers in the Premier League and said to them one year, guys, we are going to, as a group of referees, award penalty kicks that you're not going to agree with, and then the following week you're going to agree with, on the basis that we are finding it difficult because your players are getting better at diving.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, we're calling it simulation, but between us around this table, it's diving. So if it continues, right, we're going to try and detect it. We would love the FA to follow the Scottish FA that said we're going to do retrospective punishment, but the FA never bought into that. But what we did say was, we need your help. And if you were privy to that conversation, it was a grown-up, let's try and resolve this issue and make the life of referees slightly better.
Not hiding.
Didn't do away with acts of simulation because that's in the nature of some players.
Yeah.
It helped.
Yeah.
And I think when we've got so much experience in football, the fact, again, another example was that I had former referees acting as assessors, which is the norm. And I said to the Premier League, I want former managers and players to assess the referees' performances. And they looked at me, I go, a panel. We'll still have assessors, but I want former players and managers to assess the performance and bring their judgment into play to put some balance into how we're officiating an event. Because when we're talking at the elite level of the game, we're in the entertainment business.
Mm.
And if you go to a theatre to see a show and your expectation is that, the top entertainer is going to come on, and the first thing he does produces a bad sound and a poor note and he's off form, you don't suddenly say you're off. The producer doesn't come on and give him a red card. We do in football. There's enough chances to give players a red card. And therefore, I think that if we work together and really examine the thing like the handball effect, then we can get to a consensus that's acceptable within the game. Look, handball is an offence. I'm not saying don't punish it. What I am saying is take into account the word deliberately moving the hand to the ball. I think, Mr. IFAB, I think you've done a really good job in indicating that new law that the hand and arm that's going to be penalised is up to and level with the underside of the armpit. So I recognise now the ball that hits the shoulder, it's the back of the shoulder or the front of the shoulder, is not going to be penalised. I know. Right, yeah. So I think that's clarified it. And of course, then what happens, like Burnley, they go underside of armpit, we'll try and outdo the referee, we'll make our short sleeves longer.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the game, you know. And that's so you can see the passion and the difficulty of handball.
Also, though, what it's doing, Keith, is it's leading into other areas. And I wanted to pick your brains on this. And I very rarely go against you, but it's just a query. I loved your comments on the Mike Dean sending off of Slaven Bilic. And I think most listeners know I'm no fan of Mike Dean. And I agree with some of your comments. But I actually think that he was correct. Can I just offer up maybe, you know, my reasons for that being that the past history between the pair and from my sort of level-headedness and looking at it, Bilic is supposed to be in a managerial role.
Oh, let me make it quite clear that what Mike Dean did was totally correct.
To the letter.
Well, to the letter, for sure. But prevention is better than cure. So what you do is you take those scenarios as a referee. You know, even if I was an active referee and I'd sent somebody off, I'd examine it and say, was this preventable? So the first thing is, I ask the question, why is the manager on the pitch? Because I've given him the opportunity to talk at half time with the referee and full time with the referee when I was the boss. So that is the area of which to have a line of dispute. Now, in fairness to Bilic, I later learned that he was situated on the opposite side of the field to the dressing rooms and therefore had to come across the pitch. So here is what I would have expected, first of all, is when a manager comes close to a referee during the course of the match, it's a point of conflict because the manager retains all what he considers his views on every decision that's been made. So it's conflict at the very start. So the first thing is, when we get back to the normal football and managers are in the technical area, I would expect the Premier League to say, right, managers are not allowed on the field of play at any stage in the game. That is at the close of the half-time and close of the end of the match. Because they've got a route to challenge the referee outside the public eye. So that's the first thing. In the case of Bilic being on the other side of the pitch, it's easy for the Premier League to say, right, go around the outer circumference of the pitch. In terms of referees are dealing with conflict all the time. That's part of football, that's part of football refereeing. And what we say to referees, there is a stepped approach when we're refereeing footballers. Okay, if it's a red card challenge, there's no step. You're on the first and last step in that case. But where you've got a player having a bit of a go at you, there's the quiet word, the run alongside the player, quieten down, you know, I want an improvement from you. That's the first step. The second step is to now say, it's a public rebuke, come and join me. I want a conversation here. I really do need an improvement in your behaviour. Captain, can you come over? Let's sort it. Because if we don't resolve it now, this guy's heading in the wrong direction and you could be finishing up with less players. So what I was getting at was, how could Mike Dean have reduced that conflict? And sometimes, you know, you have to face that conflict. So all I wanted him to do to help sell his decision to everybody in a more positive manner was to stop, face Bilic, ask him to calm down, and then issue the red card. And that way, it doesn't look as though he's running away. And when, in any argument, right, if you're running away from it, who's gaining the power in relation to the message? And the message was increasing in Bilic's case because he was getting louder and more frustrated.
He was getting more animated.
So the point I'm You know, when you review it, go back 10 steps, and was there a point earlier in that coming together of Bilic and Dean that he could have stopped and he could have said, eye contact, please calm down. He may not have had any impact, but that's the part and process of a referee, not to run away, to deal with it, and to sell it, and to sell it to everybody. You and I knew he was going. You and I knew he deserved to go. But what a pitiful amount he was charged with and paid, I think, an £8,000 fine. No ban. Hey, come on. You know, what punishment is that to a Premier League manager who's tried to degrade and abuse, if you like, one of our referees? It's not good for the image of the game. And I always have to think about the protection of referees throughout the game.
Let's end on a positive note, Keith. Great to see someone we both know quite well, Bobby Madley, back in the English game.
Well, I thought he was treated very badly. You know, if you listen to what took place in a great television program that he was openly talked about, I listened to it, and I'm thinking, again, where's the stepped approach to his management? So if referees step out of line, you've effectively got to manage them, but they are employees. And as they are employees, you have to manage them in relationship to the laws of the country. And the laws of the country are quite clear in that there is a warning system for an employee who's not doing what you expect. You know, there's a verbal, then there's a written, then there's a final. And it seems to me, knowing that he's now got back into this scenario and listening to what he had to say, that he was treated unfairly, and that's why he's back. But you know, he is an outstanding referee. You know, in the cyclical changes of refereeing, you have what I consider to be firefighters as referees. You know, there's a tough encounter here that's going to really require a strong referee. And you look back, you know, in the career of referee, Courtney could handle conflict brilliantly. The best referee was Peter Willis. Yep. Peter Willis, the sergeant cop, he'd go in and sort him. I once watched him as a spectator at Hillsborough when Sheffield Wednesday were in the 3rd division. And this was a clash of the titans, really. It was battle from minute one. And he worked his socks off in that game. And there weren't any players sent off. So I think that, you know, this is Bobby Madley. Madley is a very good decision maker. You know, I have criticised him in the past because when you analyse an error made by a referee, you have to say why. Why is an error made? And sometimes his errors were down to, I think, his overall fitness levels. And some of that is just the sheer number of games. When you get to that top level, the travel into Europe, the travel anywhere in the world. So for me, I really do welcome him back. I'm disappointed that he's now got to work his way through the system. But if anybody's got any common sense and the system is fair, he'll quickly walk back onto a panel that is urgently in need of his skill sets, because there's one or two referees there that need to move on.
Indeed, it's always a pleasure. Thanks again, Keith, for being on the show and giving us your words of wisdom. Really interesting. And we'll see you very soon, hopefully, to talk about a bit more positivity within the game. Ladies and gents, Keith Hackett.
Thanks, Peter.